Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Midwest Concussion Clinic's free webinar series. My name is Matt. I'm the clinical director for the Midwest Concussion Clinic. Today, we're going to talk to you a little bit about concussion prevention. Is there anything that we can really do? So before we get started, I just want to say thank you for joining us again today. The more time we can spend educating the public, the more time we can spend talking to people and getting out there in front of people, it really helps us spread, the truth about concussions and really what to expect if something does happen. Try to ease your mind, because if something does happen, you end up searching the internet. It can go one of two ways really quickly. So we spend a lot of time educating the public. Thank you for joining us, and let's get to it. So the number one thing we want to talk about for today is we want to be able to identify what a concussion really is. I want to go through and just update you quickly. If you're new to the series, if you're new to talking to us, if you're new to listening to us, hey, we're going to talk to you about what a concussion really is. I want you to be able to understand the difference between prevention and reduction. There's a big difference between preventing something from happening and reducing the risk that something does happen. The third thing I want to do is I want you to be able to identify certain concussion prevention products and what they really do. There are a lot of tools out there that have been marketed for concussion prevention. We're going to go through and talk about a couple of the common ones that you may have seen or heard of. Somebody may have approached you about getting, and we want to identify what they really do and if they're really preventing concussions or just reducing the risk that they may occur. And finally, I want to talk about understanding the difference between preventing an injury and optimizing the brain for recovery from a concussion. What we can do to kind of prepare ourselves if something does happen. We'll talk about the sleep aspect, hydration, nutrition, a combination of everything that your body needs to perform at an optimal level when it's healthy and prepare itself if something does happen. If you have any questions during today's webinar, feel free to leave them in the comment section. They'll pop up. I'll answer them as needed. If you have any questions that pop up afterwards or you're watching the replay, feel free to reach out. We'll cover our contact information on the end. I'll go through and answer any questions that I have. We'll be happy to sit down and talk to you one-on-one if you do have anything that you'd like us to expand on while we're talking. The number one thing that I want you to get today is concussion prevention is impossible. Concussion risk reduction and risk mitigation are possible. So when we talk about concussion prevention versus concussion reduction, we want you to be able to tell the difference between the two, and I want you to understand how we can identify and optimize the brain to recover. So what is a concussion? A lot of times that's the first thing we talk about with patients when they walk in. We do the pleasantries. Hi, my name's Matt. Nice to meet you. What brings you in today? Hey, do you know what a concussion really is? And 9 times out of 10, we either get, I don't know, or it's a bruise. So what I'm here to do is I'm here to talk to you about what a concussion really is. A concussion is an electrical injury that happens inside the neurons that carry the electrical signals inside the brain. When our eyes see something, whether it's a football flying through the air or the car that's trying to stop in front of us or the stairs that we're trying to walk down, when it sees something, it processes it in the back of the brain, and then we have neurons that carry the electrical signals up to the front of the brain and then down into our hands and feet and make decisions. The electrical signals, when we have concussions, get disrupted. So those neurons can stretch, they can expand apart, they stretch, and all those neurons fire at the same time. When the electrical signals get disrupted, it affects every aspect of your life. It affects everything from mood regulation, concentration, speech difficulties. We have problems with word find, where we're having a conversation with somebody and we can't find the right words we want to say. We struggle with coordination and balance and sport performance and exercise intolerance. It's more than just a bruise. It's a lot more than no big deal. We hear that all the time. Well, I've heard concussions are a bruise. Bruises are no big deal. I can kind of go through a bruise, no problem. If you find a football player, a soccer player, a basketball player, any athlete out there that plays a non-contact sport, we see all of them that come in and they say, well, I mean, I've got bruises all the time. I can play through a bruise. It's not a problem. If we look at it as an electrical injury or electrical signal disruption, it brings light to it's much more severe than just a bruise. That's why they don't show up on advanced imaging. A lot of times we use CT scans, MRIs, SPECT scans, PET scans with significant brain injury to rule out the presence of a more severe injury, a structural injury, a bleed to the brain, things that are much more serious, much more we need to get them fixed right away, whether it's surgical intervention or stronger medications, things that would make you present to the emergency room. Most of the time they don't show up on CT scans, and then you get told, hey, nothing scans are normal, you'll be fine in a couple days. And then when you're not fine in a couple days, you start scrambling for answers. I'm here to tell you, it's much more than a bruise. It's an electrical injury that will affect every aspect of your life. Now let's talk about prevention versus reduction. I talked a little bit about the beginning. Prevention is keeping something from happening. We can't keep concussions from happening. We can do everything in the world to prevent concussions from happening, but life happens. We talk about it all the time. For every sports-related concussion that I have falls, motor vehicle accidents, bunk bed-related incidents, dorm room incidents, goofing off that happens off the playing field, car accidents, domestic violence. Sports get a bad rap, and a lot of concussion prevention is brought up in sports. Well, even if we put you in a plastic bubble, you're walking down the stairs, the plastic bubble has a hole in it, pops, you fall. Hey, we did everything we could to prevent the concussion, but yet it still happened. Part of the reason we can't prevent a concussion is because we're not able to keep the brain from sliding inside the skull. Now, if you've been into the clinic or talked to me before, we realize that the brain doesn't move as much as we think it does. But when we sustain a certain amount of force through the brain, those axons that carry the electrical signal stretch. And when those axons stretch is when we get the electrical signal disruption. The only way to keep those electrons from stretching is to hold tight everything inside the brain itself and prevent any of the white space that's in the areas of the brain from sliding back and forth. That's physically impossible with the technology that we have today. What we can do is reduce the chance that the concussions happen. A lot of the marketed tools that are out there work on reducing the amount of force that's pushed through the head and the skull at time of impact. Doesn't necessarily reduce the risk of concussion, but it reduces the amount of force sustained in one direction or one area inside the brain. So it's with the technology we have today, it's physically impossible to prevent concussions. Now, that doesn't mean we're not getting there. We will talk about one area or one product that's out there that has been FDA approved for concussion prevention, and we'll talk about what it does and how close we are for that aspect of happening. But right now, we don't have the technology out there to prevent concussions. We can reduce the risk and reduce the overall chance that concussions happen, but we can't prevent them. Let's talk about some common prevention products that are out there on the market. A lot of times we have football players' parents that come in. Hey, I bought the highest rated football helmet out there, rated against concussions. The NFL says that this is the #1 rated helmet out there, but yet they're still in my office. Football helmets and the rating system that's done by the NFL every year is a fantastic service for college, high school, youth sports, anybody who's playing football out there. The rating system that the NFL goes through, they put a lot of research into which helmets perform the best on testing to reduce the risk for skull fractures. Helmet technology is getting better and better every year. And as the helmet technology goes up, it's reducing the amount of force that gets put through the skull at any given time. That reduces the amount of risk associated with skull fractures. It doesn't do anything to keep the brain inside the head from moving around. Our brain is like a bowl of jello, right? So we have the skull, which is the bowl, on the outside that protects the jello, which is inside. The jello is our brain. When you hit the bowl, the jello moves inside. Same kind of concept with the helmet, right? You hit the helmet, the brain moves. If we can hit the helmet and disperse that force through that brain into different areas, we reduce the amount of force that's directly driven through the brainstem at any given time. That's the idea behind helmets and why they're rated for skull fracture prevention, not necessarily concussion prevention. One of the other areas that's starting to gain a lot of traction with football and concussion prevention in football is a padded helmet cover that goes around the football helmets. You see a lot of the NFL teams in camp right now that are wearing a lot of these padded helmets that are over top of their helmet in general, and it's an added layer of force reduction through the skull. Again, it's not doing a whole lot to reduce the amount of force that goes through the brain, but through the helmet and the skull itself. Now let's move away from football. Concussion headbands. There are a bunch of different companies that market concussion headbands. Same concept. It's a padded headband that produces different pads in the soft parts of the skull. There are certain areas inside the skull that require less force through it to sustain an injury than others, particularly our temples and the back of our skull. The base of our skull is where all the good things are, where all the internal structures happen. They sit kind of right behind your jaw, right in the middle of your neck and throat at the base of that skull in what we call the midbrain, the area that's in charge of coordination and heart and lung regulation and blood flow and temperature regulation and hormones. Where a lot of the good stuff happens is through the brainstem. When we have areas that are softer inside the brain, we have a lot that goes on in the temple and a lot that goes on right there at the back of that midbrain. So those headbands protect the different areas and pad those areas that are commonly associated with either one, collisions like in soccer, going up for headers, going head to head, or two, falls. A lot of times if we fall forward, we're able to catch ourselves. If we fall backwards, that's when the risk is a lot higher and we hit the back of our head on the ground or on the stairs. So that's where those concussion headgear come in. Again, it dissipates force through the skull to prevent the amount of force being driven in one area. It doesn't necessarily reduce the amount of force overall to the brain, just spreads it out to for a bigger area. Mouthguards. Mouthguards are the one tool that has been marketed forever as concussion prevention. You can't play football, you can't play basketball, you can't play contact soccer, you can't play wrestling, you can't wrestle without a mouthguard, right? Football has mandated mouthguards throughout, and it was always mandated because it's concussion prevention, it's concussion risk reduction. They're not. Mouthguards are guarded or used to prevent dental fractures. It reduces the rate of jaw fractures by not letting your teeth clamp down together. By wearing a mouthguard, your risk and your prevention, it starts to take the force that gets sustained through the jaw as it comes up and you get hit, amount and dissipates that force over a wider area as it passes up through the brainstem. Again, we're not reducing the amount of force that goes through the brain itself. We're reducing the surface area of that force. So talking about those three are common that are used in marketing techniques as, hey, look at these concussion safe, concussion proof, concussion prevention. They aren't concussion prevention. They're good at providing or dissipating the amount of force and providing a larger surface area for the brain to absorb the force that goes through. But again, they do not prevent concussions. The fourth column on this slide goes through and talks about a collar that's out there on the market. There's one collar out there on the market that has been FDA approved, and that approval happened recently, that comes around and it sits low around the neck and it puts pressure on the arteries that go up into the head. What happens is we push on those arteries and it increases the amount of blood that goes up into the blood-brain barrier that sits between the brain and the skull. So essentially everything that we've talked about. How do you prevent concussions? You prevent the ability for the brain to move inside the skull. You prevent the axons from being able to move. The closest we've gotten to that right now is a collar that's on the market that wraps around the back and puts pressure on the blood flow to the top of the head, and it adds more blood to that blood-brain barrier. And the only problem we run into with that collar, and it's getting better as each new version comes out, with that collar, it's difficult to maintain position. As people sweat and move and rotate and run and slide their head side to side, we start to see the collar shift just a little bit. And any kind of shifting in that collar opens up blood flow and closes down blood flow in areas that it's not designed to be. So the closest we've gotten so far is that collar. And the collar that's out there is one that's growing and getting a lot of stability and getting a lot of play in the market. And as it should be, it's the only FDA approved prevention. The one area that we struggle with is when patients wear them, it can be a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit of that it gets used to wearing. And two, we need to make sure that it's worn in a proper fashion for it to actually do what it's marketed to do and what the research proves that it does. So just to sum up this slide, there are a lot of concussion prevention marketing tools out there. The closest we've gotten so far is a collar that's on the market. The helmets, the headgear, the mouth guards, those are all reducing the amount of force that's presented up through the brain. So there's not a lot we can do to prevent concussions. Even the collar that's out there, it doesn't necessarily prevent concussions. It just reduces the risk that happens with concussion forces. Now let's talk about what we can do. We can't prevent concussions. That's this whole topic of conversation, is we cannot prevent concussions, but we can reduce the risk. Now we've reduced the risk. What else can we do that says, hey, we're ready to go just in case something does happen? I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something that we call the brain reserve. So the brain reserve is just the day-to-day nutrients that are inside the brain that help us carry out the function that we need to optimize function of our brain. Think about everything that you do on a day-to-day basis. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you go to work, you go to school, you go to practice, you drive home, you listen to the radio, you sing, you carry on conversations, you come home and play with the kids, you play with the grandkids, you come home and play video games, you've got homework, you've got work to do. The brain does all of this without us thinking about it. Now think about how many breaths you take, how many times you blink your eyes, how much body fluid that's moving through your body, how many times do you go to the bathroom a day, how much temperature change happens. Everybody's got an office that's cold. Everybody's got a room in the house that's too hot. The brain has to regulate all of that. And when we're healthy, we don't notice it. When we're not healthy, when the brain's recovering or healing, it's the number one thing that you notice. All of the things that you've taken for granted disappear because now everything is work. It's not easy to do. So when we talk about the brain reserve, we talk about what we can do to optimize recovery that if it does happen. The good thing about this is even if you're adding all of this into your day-to-day life, this is getting your brain to function at a higher level. Now, not necessarily going to make us smarter, make us more coordinated, make us a better athlete, but it's going to reduce the amount of energy that our brain needs to do certain activities. It's going to make sure that we're getting the right nutrients, the right hydration, the right sleep pattern, everything that we need to make sure that our brain functions on a healthy day-to-day basis. Now, if the injury happens, a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about here in just a second is what we need to make sure that we're beginning the repair process that happens as soon as the injury is sustained. The idea of neuroplasticity, that your brain is constantly evolving. You're constantly creating and shutting off neuron connections and neuron pathways in a healthy instance. Now we have a brain that's got a damaged neuron chain or a neural network. We've now got to go through and repair neurons, create new neurons, shut down neurons that are damaged. And that's where the brain reserve and vitamin deficiencies come into play. So we talk about nutrition, we'll talk about sleep habits, we'll talk about sleep hygiene, which is just keeping a consistent routine, vitamin supplementation and hydration. With vitamin deficiencies, one of the biggest ones that happens, especially in our neck of the woods up here in the Midwest, is a vitamin D deficiency. A lot of times, vitamin D comes from natural sunlight. That's our biggest source of vitamin D. This time of the year, fantastic. We're out in the sun. It's great. We're all tan. We have a good time. We're out enjoying the sun. We're getting a good amount of vitamin D. Now, here in Indiana, it's gray for 6 months out of the year. When it's gray for 6 months out of the year, we don't like to get outside. We still get UV exposure and we still get vitamin D, but most of us here in the Midwest need vitamin D supplementation. As we shift into fall, we get ready to go into our winter sports season and our winter season. Vitamin D supplementation becomes more and more important for our sleep-wake cycles, our brain health, our overall brain function, because vitamin D is vital in creating and repairing neuron connections. Now we talk about optimizing just in case something does happen. Vitamin D is vital to our recovery in terms of creating those new neurons. Magnesium and calcium are two different minerals that our body uses on a regular basis to repair and regenerate neuron tissue and brain tissue. When we're healthy, we use it at a consistent rate. All of a sudden, a concussion happens, and our need for neuron replacement or our need for vitamins goes up exponentially. We're using our vitamins and our minerals over and over and over again to repair at a much faster and higher rate than we do when we're not suffering from a brain injury. So making sure that we're getting the proper amount of nutrients and vitamins in, vitamin D, magnesium, and calcium are the easiest way to prepare ourselves just in case something does happen. Creatine. Creatine is one of those minerals, and that's gotten a lot of publicity on both sides of the street.
When I was growing up, hey, creatine's really bad for you. It's going to kill your kidneys. It's not going to be good. Don't take creatine. The weightlifting room and and all the strength training gurus, it's, hey, creatine's great. Got to have it. Now we're doing a lot more research on is creatine really bad or is it really good? We're starting to realize that the benefits of creatine are starting to outweigh some of the suspected risks that we used to think. Creatine is really good at generating normal brain function. It helps generate new tissue growth. It helps us optimize the amount of nutrients that we're using inside the brain. The reason it's always been passed around in the weight training room and the weight room communities are it's good for muscle growth. Your brain is a muscle. It's good for muscle growth. It's good for maintaining and creating new neurons. It's specifically better for us in brain health if we've taken creatine in the past. So we talk about optimizing our brain health. Optimizing with creatine is good. Okay. Now we'll talk about omega-3s. Omega-3s are something that have been tied to brain health for a long time. Omega-3s are fatty acids that are good for normal brain function. Omega-3s are commonly found in your fish, commonly found in your tunas, your salmons, people do them in drinks now. There's brain supplements. There's omega-3 supplement pills that are out there, all good for vitamin supplementation pre-injury. When we look at vitamin D, good sources of vitamin D out there, obviously the sunshine, vitamin D supplementation, fish, our milk, soy milk, regular milk, tuna, salmon, those are all really good sources of vitamin D, natural sources of vitamin D. Now, if we're looking at vitamin supplementation, we want to stay away from vitamins with fillers. We want to get our vitamins from a natural source, whether it's a Whole Foods or a Walmart, a CVS, a vitamin shop, staying away from some of them that we can get online, some of the strict supplementation groups that are built for more strength and performance versus natural health, because they have fillers that are in them. With concussions, the fillers turn into free radicals inside the brain. The free radicals in the brain cause damage. So we want to get it from a natural source. The last thing I want to talk about with the brain reserve is we don't want to macro dose our vitamins. Macro dose means taking more than the daily recommendations. The reason we don't want to macro dose is because it becomes really expensive urine. The body can't take in the nutrients. So all it does is our body breaks it down, it gets passed into our urine, and we pass it back out. It becomes really expensive urine over time. So really sit down and take in to what you're eating, what you're taking in. Vitamin D is an easy one that we're all going to supplement here in the Midwest. Now we start to break down some of the other things that we can that we can supplement. So sit down, athletic trainers at the schools. I'll gladly sit down with anybody to talk about what we need. There are vitamin testing that we can do with blood samples out there that we can kind of order if we struggle or if we notice somebody's not recovering the way we expect. Those are things that we can do to look at the overall nutrient level in our system. Nutrition and hydration are vital for concussion recovery, for sports performance, for sleep, for day-to-day activities. I'm here to tell you now that we're getting into the fall sports season, we've really lucked out to this point of the year. It hasn't been hot around here. Looking at the next week, 2 days are kicking up, 90-degree weather. Hydration is going to become really, really important for recovery, for rest, for sport performance. Hydration works 24 hours in advance. So right now, what you're doing is you're hydrating for tomorrow. You're hydrating for Friday's practices. You're hydrating for the weekend. You're trying to provide half hour or 24 hours in advance. All your body processes, every cellular function that your body does requires water. When the brain's injured, your brain is constantly trying to repair itself 24/7. It's not shutting off. It continues to use cellular functions. Cells die, cells move, cells transport. Our body uses an exponential amount of water more when we have a concussion. The old adage is an ounce per pound of body weight, right? So an ounce of water per pound of body weight. It's a lot of water that most of us aren't getting in. That's when we're healthy. When we look at concussions, we want to get 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces per pound of body weight to get that water back into our system. Water is not the only thing that's important. You have to replenish electrolytes, salt, and the electrolytes that are in our sports and energy drinks. That's why some of the energy drinks are out there are so sugary, is because they're trying to hide the overall salt taste to them because they're replenishing electrolytes. Protein and salt intake 20 to 30 minutes post-activity, whether it's working out in the yard,
playing a sporting event, practicing, going for a jog, going for a walk, anything that gets our heart rate to an elevated state, that our muscles are starting to break down, that we're starting to get tissue regeneration, we need to get hydration and protein and electrolyte supplementation 20 to 30 minutes post-activity is best. We've talked about a lot of different things, right? We've covered a lot of different areas on what concussion prevention versus reduction look like. There's a lot of different tools out there that we can sit there and talk about. What are they trying to sell? What are they trying to market? Do they actually do what they're trying to get me to do? Are they worth the investment? That's where concussion prevention versus concussion reduction. There's one tool out there on the market. There's one collar out there on the market that has been FDA approved for concussion prevention, but we're really mitigating the risk better than the rest of them. So overall, concussions are an electrical injury. They're not necessarily a physical injury. They're not a bruise. They're an electrical injury that's far more disruptive to our day-to-day activities. I want you to be able to identify those concussion tools that are out there. Anybody that's marketing concussion prevention is doing just that. They're marketing. They're trying to market a product to you that may not necessarily prevent concussion, but it would be better served as marketing concussion reduction or concussion risk reduction. We can't prevent concussions because we can't prevent the neurons from sliding inside the white matter inside the brain. We're getting closer. The collar that's out there that's available to us is the closest we've gotten, but we still can't prevent the sliding of those neurons inside the white matter itself. We're doing better because we're providing a barrier around the brain to kind of push and squeeze in a little bit on the brain to keep it from moving, keep the spaces from moving as much, but we're still inside the brain itself, unable to keep those neurons from moving. And last but not least, that brain optimization. We can do things to prepare ourselves just in case something happens. The good thing is preparing your brain to work optimally is great because your brain is working at a higher level. It's working more efficiently. It's working better. The key takeaway from today, concussion prevention is impossible, but risk reduction and mitigation and optimization for recovery are possible. I want to thank you guys again for joining us. If you have any questions about today's webinar, any of our webinars in the past, or concussions in general, feel free to reach out. If you want to schedule an appointment with us, no referral is needed. Give us a call at the number listed on the screen, 260-432-1800. We accept all major insurances. We accept cash options. If we don't accept insurance, we can get you in rapidly now that we're getting back into our fall sports season. Our goal is to get you in as soon as we can within that 24 to 48 hour window. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out here on our Facebook. Our other social medias, Instagram, Twitter, we're at MW Concussion. You can find the replay for this on our Facebook or replay for this on all of our other social media handles, our YouTube page, searching for Midwest Concussion Clinic. You can find this one in our last lecture. If you have any questions, you can also reach out to me at mwconcussion@gmail.com or follow up on our website at www.mwconcussion.com. Once again, my name's Matt. I'm the clinical director for the Midwest Concussion Clinic. I tell this to all my patients on our last visit. I hope I never see you because everything's going well. But if we are here, if things happen, we're here to help you. Thanks again. I hope you learned something today. Take care.